Welcome to the world of science fiction stories, and don't forget to like, share, and subscribe my channel. Enjoy the listening. Galactic aliens watched as a female human medic saved their old alien wolf. Then something happened. The great assembly of Solari Reach had never seen such stillness. A chamber that had once thundered with the voices of over 50 starfaring species now held its breath beneath crystal domes that shimmered with refracted starlight. For this gathering, every corridor had been polished, every insignia restored. The elders called it the Hour of Continuum, a ritual meant to honor the longevity of peace, an illusion delicately maintained for generations. At the heart of this ceremony stood a single figure older than most. Remembered to fear, Luro the Unyielding, the last living descendant of the Vihari, the ancient sentient wolfkin said to have once ruled whole quadrants through wisdom, not war. A silver man flowed like frost beneath the chamber lights, and his steps echoed with the weight of 1,000 years. No guards flanked him, he needed none. Even in his age, his towering form exuded gravity. Nora Selden, stationed at the lower tier among the Amur medical team, knew exactly who he was. Her gaze followed him with the reverence her species was rarely afforded to show openly. She'd read about him, buried in dusty fragments of xenomedic archives and half-remembered academy notes. His physiology was unlike any other species, more myth than biology. There were no confirmed medical diagrams, no anatomical studies permitted. The Vihari had been too proud to be examined, too proud to ask for help. But even proud things break. It happened mid-step. Luro froze, claws scraping against the marbled floor, his massive frame trembled at first. The assembly assumed it was part of the ceremony, a pause before some storied announcement. Then he exhaled hard, ragged, and fell. Gasping tore through the silence, diplomats leapt from their seats, and guards shouted in 6 languages. Nora was already running. She didn't wait for protocol. She vaulted the security rail, slammed her kit against the ground as she landed, and slid to his side. The other medics hesitated at the edge, scanning for command authority, waiting for clearance. Nora didn't wait for permission. She felt for a pulse beneath the dense, matted fur of his neck. Nothing, code read. She barked into her calm, activating her portable cardiac probe. Hune, in arrest, I need access now. One of the Vihari delegates bared his fangs at her. You are not permitted to touch him. Hune's dying, he snarled back. Then tell him to stop. And with that, she began chest compressions. Except this was no human chest. The bone was thick, the muscles dense, like braided steel cords. Each push sent tremors up her arms, her knees dug into the cold floor, sweat gathered beneath her uniform collar. 1 minute passed, then 2, no response. The assembly watched, stunned into stillness, breath held as a human, barely a whisper in the halls of galactic legacy, fought to return breath to a being who had outlived empires. Then on the 3rd minute, his chest shuddered. A low growl rumbled up from his throat. His eyes, ancient and molten amber, opened. They locked on Nora, and through blood-kicked lips and shallow breath, the old alien wolf spoke slowly and gravely. You brought me back. She blinked, lips parted in disbelief. Then he said it again, louder, stronger. Thank you, little healer. The chamber did not breathe. The galaxy had just changed its story. It took 4 full minutes for the chamber to recover. By then, the pulse of every diplomatic line had already burst to life. Holographic screens were activated across the outer ring. News drones, barred from recording, had caught just enough through back channels. The Vihari Council shouted for silence. The human delegation stood frozen, and Nora sat back on her heels, panting beside the slowly rising bulk of the most powerful living creature known in the Empire. Luro rose unsteadily, refusing assistance from the honor guard. His breathing was shallow but sure, and his gaze, still fixed on Nora, held something between confusion and reverence, not the kind born from submission but recognition. I saw light, he said quietly, his voice rasping like ancient wind through stone canyons. But then I felt hands, small hands, fierce hands. Nora didn't answer. She couldn't. Her limbs were shaking, her knees were numb. She couldn't believe she was still alive. He was still alive. Luro turned slowly to face the council. Dice, this human, he said, projecting now, his voice regaining force, did what no warrior, no archist, no Vihari Tin has done in my lifetime. She touched my death and returned me. No one is permitted to make physical contact with a high elder during a sacred collapse. one of the lesser dignitaries from the SRA assembly hissed, desperate to salvage control. This was a violation. She gave me life, Luro growled, his eyes narrowed, and every being in the chamber shrank by instinct. Would you have preferred I remain silent forever? The silence that followed was thick with consequence. Luro turned back to Nora. He lowered his massive head until his muzzle was level with hers. She could see the cracks in his canines, the fine dust of centuries lining his mane. He was old, more legend than flesh, but there was nothing fragile in his gaze. "What is your name?" he asked. She swallowed. "Nora Selden, emergency medic, level 2 clearance." He blinked slowly, then said, "Let the Empire remember this name and let it never forget." He exhaled again, deep and rumbling, that my second life was granted not by the old blood, not by Empire, but by a healer who dared to touch me. And across the Empire, systems that had slumbered in hierarchy for 1,000 years began for the first time to feel something new: disruption, reverence, and the soft, unrelenting heartbeat of change. News of the wolf's words spread faster than light within a single galactic cycle. Every inhabited sector, from the icy moons of Krell to the bioluminescent oceans of Surian, had heard the phrase, "Thank you, little healer." It was replayed, translated, dissected. Nora's image, hair soaked in sweat, eyes wild with concentration as she knelt over Luro's dying body, was embedded into feeds, murals, and even myth. But in the polished heart of the Galactic Empire, reverence was dangerous. In the days following the revival, Nora was summoned to the central citadel of the Imperial Dome on Tal Sur, the core world of law, order, and immaculate fear. She was escorted not as a hero, but as a variable, something unknown and therefore unsanctioned. Her steps echoed through crystalline corridors, flanked by obsidian statues of beings long forgotten, each one colder than the last. The chamber she entered was called the Tribunal of Flame, though no fires burned in it anymore. It was a cold place of rhetoric and shadows. The Council of 12 sat in elevated arcs, draped in veils of status, their faces barely visible behind silken masks. They had ruled the known galaxy for 600 years, and they did not enjoy being upstaged. "You are a field medic," began the central figure, the Lord Arbitron, his voice like blades sliding through velvet. "And yet you crossed protocol to touch an elder species during a sacred procession. Explain." Nora stood straight, her heart pounded, but she kept her tone level. "He collapsed, his heart stopped, I responded. There are protocols," another counselor hissed. "Ferrari death rights are protected. You interfered with a sovereign being's sacred passing. He was dying." "Nora," she said louder now, "not ascending, dying, and no one moved. You overstepped your caste." The Lord Arbitron said, "You shamed the silence of an ancient race." "I saved someone." Silence. And then came the rasp of the 11th counselor, a holobon being of the Arari caste. "Do you understand the weight of that? No Vihari has ever offered gratitude to another species in recorded history." Nora did not flinch. Then maybe they've been waiting too long. Behind her, the chamber doors creaked open, and in walked the cause of the storm himself, Luro. He did not bow, he did not ask. He entered like thunder stitched into fur, and with every step the tribunal's shadows seemed to recoil. "I come not to testify," he said, "but to remind the council." They tensed. "I have slept through dynasties. I have watched kings burn and warriors crumble, but I remember every soul who has ever dared reach for me in kindness. There are few." He stopped beside Nora, his great head held high. "This human did not dishonor me. She honored life itself. And if your walls cannot bear the truth of that, then perhaps you have mistaken stone for strength." The council was silent. Luro turned his gaze toward them all. "Touch her again with accusation, and I will touch this place with fire." And then, without permission, without clearance, without apology, he led Nora out. The chamber did not rise to stop them. No fire burned under the marble that day, but everyone felt the heat aboard the transport that took them back to VNX. The silence between Nora and Luro stretched for several hours as the stars blurred past them in long, silver lines. And the tension that had once surged through her veins was now settling into something else. Something heavier. Not fear, but responsibility. He stood at the front of the cabin, still as stone, his gaze lost in the starfield. She knew better than to disturb him still. When the quiet grew unbearable, she spoke, "You didn't have to come." He didn't turn. Yes, I did. They would have exiled me, or worse, they still might. She nodded, folding her hands in her lap. So why, finally? He turned his eyes, which glowed faintly, twin embers caught in pools of ancient time. Because you heard me, he said, frowning. You weren't speaking. No, he said, but I was crying. And then softer, they build legends around us. Call us eternal, sacred, cold, but I was dying and I was afraid and no one saw it but you. The confession made her heart tighten. You didn't even hesitate. He said, you broke their rules. Not for power, not for fame, you broke them because you cared. She looked up. That's what a medic does. He smiled, a slow, sorrowful curl of a lip over fang. Then this galaxy has forgotten what a healer truly is. They arrived at Varnex not to riots or parades, but to whispers, the kind that crawl between data channels and behind closed doors, the kind that make regimes tremble. Soldiers saluted her, scientists studied her hands, children, alien and human alike, began drawing her into murals beside Luro, calling her wolf friend in a dozen dialects. But in the outer sectors, something more dangerous stirred. Dozens of independent species councils began broadcasting a simple question. If a human can revive a legend with her hands, what else have we underestimated? Some called her savior, some called her heretic. But across the stars, from icy moons to gas-burnt skis, one thing was certain. The howl of the old wolf had been answered, and now the galaxy would learn what happened when gratitude broke the silence of empires 1,000 light cycles ago. The Vihari were said to have whispered to the stars. That was the myth repeated in glyphs and sung in temple shadows across a dozen systems. Now, with a human breath bringing one of their last elders back from the edge of death, the stars were whispering back, and the empire was choking on their meaning. The halls of Ether Spire, a neutral council built into the bones of an asteroid, buzzed with tension. Delegates, rulers, scholars, and technocrats gathered, not to praise or condemn, but to understand. How could a mere human, lacking noble bond or Soin lineage, have touched a creature of such power and be thanked for it? Nora Selden stood at the heart of the spire's highest chamber, wrapped in plain fabric instead of armor, eyes tired from travel and noise. She had been summoned here as if she were a myth made flesh, but she felt no larger than she had always been. She was just a medic, a woman who had knelt beside a dying body and chosen to fight for it with her bare hands. But they didn't see her that way. Every voice in the chamber demanded explanation. Not science, not truth, just validation for their discomfort. How had the sacred rites of Vihari mortality been interrupted by someone not of their blood? Why had the old wolf not rejected her touch, as was ancient law? The delegates from the Drawn Compact went further. They accused her of staging the event, of manipulating genetic bonds to simulate a collapse. The Arc Tribune of Viral Sector asked if she was trained in psychic biomimicry, a technology outlawed long ago. Nora answered each question the same way she did what anyone with a heart should have done. Her words were never enough. That night she retreated into her assigned chamber high above the outer ring of the spire, where the void of stars circled without care for politics. She stood at the edge of the crystalline balcony and exhaled. Every breath fogged the glass. Her hands, scarred from work and now notoriety, pressed against her sides. Her reflection in the crystal looked older than she remembered. Behind her, a low growl vibrated through the walls. Luro entered without ceremony, no guards, no warnings, just the quiet thunder of his paws, the scent of cold air and ancient things. They do not deserve your explanations, he said. They don't want explanations, they want permission to forget what happened. They cannot not anymore. He stood beside her, his form towering but his voice gentle. I told you once that I remembered every kindness. That hasn't changed. They're calling me a threat now, an anomaly, a warning sign. You are all of those, he said, to those who fear what they cannot command. She turned to him. Then what am I to you? Luro's eyes, glowing with starlight memory, softened. To me, you are the stone I never expected to hold when the cliff gave way. They stood in silence for a time. Then he bent low and touched his snout to her chest, not a bow, but a recognition. Tomorrow, he said, I will speak in your place, but they won't listen. They will if I howl the next day. In the spire's grand chamber, Luro stood before the gathered powers of the galaxy and spoke with no translator, no amplification, no compromise. I died, he said, and it was a human who called me back. She is not of my blood, my kind, or my legacy, but she is kin and spirit. You call her threat, I call her pack. A silence fell so deep it pierced through space itself, and across 1,000 systems the word pack changed meaning. It no longer belonged to one species. It belonged to anyone who chose compassion over protocol. The first assassination attempt came less than a week later. Nora had just left a small gathering in the outer city on Vex, where she had been consulting on cross-species first response programs when her transport was hit by a silent missile drone. The blast sent her vehicle careening into a Lora market dome. She should have died, would have, if not for the Vihari guardian who had followed her at Lorok's command. The attacker escaped into the void. No insignia, no message, only silence. But the message had been loud enough. They weren't done with her. The Empire was splintering, not from rebellion, but from truth. Because Nora was not just a symbol of life saved. She was a contradiction, proof that mercy and ancient power did not exist in isolation, that the sacred could be healed, not just feared. Luro, recovering still from his collapse, returned to full presence in the galaxy, not in war, not in roar, but in defense. He summoned the elders of the Rift Corps, creatures thought extinct, to vouch for her. He traveled to the Archive Nebula and laid a fang upon the Pillar of Binding, a gesture of unbreakable trust performed only once in galactic history. He entered the dreams of the High Primes in the Ural's Trine, and when they woke, they wept and offered sanctuary. Each step he took carved a path behind Nora that no fleet could erase. But Nora did not retreat into safety. She insisted on returning to her work, on training healers, especially those in lower caste outposts and war-torn relic worlds. Her hands did not forget what they were made for. One day, as she treated a poison-wounded child from the Severan line, she looked up to find Luro watching from the doorway. "You should rest," he said. "So should you," she replied. He stepped forward and lay beside her in silence. The child looked between them with wide, silver eyes and whispered, "Are you his mate?" Nora laughed softly, wiping blood from her hands. "No, just his friend." Luro's eyes crinkled in that rare expression the Vihari had no human name for, somewhere between pride and mourning. "Pack," he said. Nora nodded. "Pack." They stayed there until the child slept, and in that stillness, surrounded by wounds, whispers, and the breath between teeth, Nora felt the weight of history easing one heartbeat at a time. The stars began to change. It was not sudden but undeniable, like a tide revering after millennia, subtle but unstoppable. In the weeks following Luro's defense and Nora's survival of the assassination attempt, something ancient stirred across the galactic rim. Whole systems that had once remained mute beneath the Empire's eye, silent provinces, ruined colonies, tribes buried in myth, began to speak again, and they all spoke of her. Not as royalty, not as a warrior, but as the one who touched the heart of a wolf and lived. Nora Selden's image became the banner, not of rebellion, but of remembrance. She was seen kneeling, not standing. Her hands were always open, her words always honest. For the first time in centuries, someone not born into a high caste, not forged in warfare or prophecy, had become the symbol of what lay beyond fear. And yet fear remained, for every world that called her healer, another whispered of risk. The Empire's old guard did not sleep. They met in cold sanctums and decommissioned moons, where light never touched the ground. There they spoke in codes too old for the new generations to understand, and what they spoke of now was extinction, not of the Vihari, not of humans, but of change. They called for a return to order, for the sealing of records, for the quiet erasure of Nora Selden's image from memory before it became more than a ripple. What they hadn't expected was that it already had. Across the drifting orbital cities of Vraz, hundreds of half-blood children carved her likeness into corridor walls. On the jungled moons of Shallow, wounded beasts began appearing near human settlements, not to attack but to be healed. The bond was growing, not because of species, but because of something deeper, shared pain, shared breath. And in the northern rim of the galaxy, where the stars burned red and the skis still whispered the old songs, something else awakened, a howl. Not Luro's, older, the first pack Luro had spoken of them only once in a dream, in a slow voice while watching the fires burn low. They were the howl that taught silence to listen, he had said. They faded not from death, but from disbelief, when the galaxy stopped believing the old bonds could heal, and now they stirred again because one human had believed, and belief, when touched by breath and heartbeat, became invitation. Luro knew it before anyone else. He came to Nora in the middle of the night, silent as moonlight. "You must come," he said. She didn't ask where, she simply rose and followed. They left in an unmarked ship cloaked in the black of the between lanes, guided not by star maps but by instinct. Luro moved through space like it remembered him, like the void itself stepped aside for his presence. Nora stood by him, silent, unsure of where they were going, but certain it was where she needed to be. After 4 days in the nothing, they arrived at a dead star. No planets, no moons, just a sphere of ash and memory at its core, a floating relic. What looks like a broken moon split down its center, glowing faintly with pulse light, is the Maw of Riss, Luro said, where the first pack vanished. Nora stared. You think they're alive? No, I know, they remember. The ship docked at the edge of the split stone. They walked together, a medic and a legend, through halls carved with claws and songs. Strange creatures moved in shadow, not hostile, just curious at the heart of them all. They found it not a body, not a breath, old, slow, unyielding, a dormant thing too vast to describe, furred, horned, silent. Luro stepped forward and knelt. Nora followed. You brought me back, Luro whispered. Perhaps you can remind them. Nora looked up into the vast, golden eyes of a beast that had not blinked in eons, and she placed her hand upon its chest. She did not press, she did not speak, she simply was there, and the pulse returned once, then again. The breath of the galaxy changed its rhythm. The first pack opened its eyes, and the old empire began to die. They came like storm fronts, 3 dreadnoughts forged from the empire's last core forges, painted with obsidian hulls and trimmed in blood steel, sent not with diplomacy, not with inquiry, but with purpose. To end the ripple on the eve of the celestial convergence, when all 3 moons of Varnex aligned and the stars themselves tilted to watch the Empire launch its final campaign. Their target was not Ether Spire, it was Nora. She stood on the ridge of Ver Hall's peak, where the skis opened into a dome of aurora and memory below her. Thousands had gathered, not with weapons, but with firelight. She had called for no one, but they came. Vihari, humans, half-breeds, healers, broken veterans, children of silence, all there because something had to be protected. They mean to wipe this clean, she said. They mean to test if the howl still matters. She turned to him. Does it? He smiled. Let me remind them. And then he howled. The sound tore through the mountain, through the crowd, through the air itself. One voice, one call, and the sky answered. From across the stars, ships broke from hiding. Wolves, forgotten and wild, emerged from the cracks of time. The first pack arrived, not in fleets but in presence, and at the front of them the beast Nora had touched, the one that had slept in the maw for millennia, unfurled its limbs and howled. The dreadnoughts trembled, they fired. The mountain erupted in flame, but the flame held. Nora stood at the center of it all, the wind curling through her hair, her feet planted, her arms outstretched, not to block but to welcome. She did not fight with weapons, she fought with witness, with belief. And when the smoke cleared and the ships were gone, turned away, not destroyed or changed, there stood Luro beside her and the first pack behind her. The Empire did not return, not because they were beaten, but because the howl had returned. And it belonged now not just to wolves, but to healers, to humans, to pack. The dreadnoughts never touched the ground. Some said it was fear that turned them back. Others believed it was awe or something deeper, something remembered in the bones of the Empire itself. The old ones called it the tremor before reverence. Whatever the cause, the sky remained intact, and the world beneath it changed. News spread not in reports or broadcasts, but in songs, not formal ones, but living songs sung by travelers in the cargo bays of nomad ships, hummed by scavengers on asteroid stations, whispered by children as they pressed their hands into the fur of tamed beasts. The story was always the same. A healer, a fallen wolf, a hand on a broken chest, a heartbeat returned, a howl shared. Nora Selden's name stopped being just a name. It became a threshold, a signal of what could no longer be ignored. In hundreds of systems, species that once shunned human contact now opened their doors, not because humans were feared or admired, but because one had done something unforgivable in the best way. She had made the sacred intimate. The old orders didn't collapse in fire, they withered beneath the weight of breath. Silent mandates lost their teeth. Rules carved into law stone were now footnotes in children's fables. Even the Empire, stubborn and wounded, found itself fracturing from within. The Council of 12 was now 8, after a string of high-profile resignations, and convened one final time on Tal Serene, the great world that had once been the seat of inflexible power. It was dusk when they voted. The verdict was broadcast not with trumpets, but with a single line of text across every registered channel. The healer's touch stands above caste. It was the first time in over 1,000 years that the Empire had acknowledged something without owning it. Nora stood in a small field on VCK when the message reached her. She was planting vines for a new garden outside the sanctuary, one that didn't yet exist but that she believed would. She didn't cheer, she didn't fall to her knees, she simply stood and breathed. Luro came to her side, older now, his fur streaked with ash from the fire he had held back. He had not howled since the night of the dreadnoughts, not because the howl had ended, but because it had finally been heard. "It's begun," he said. "No," Nora replied, kneeling to place a seed into soil. "It's re-begun." She placed her palm to the ground. It was warm. Behind her, the first pack watched, not as gods, not as judges, but as kin. The days that followed were slow and beautiful, not peace exactly. Too much pain still lived in the stars, but recovery. Species met who had never spoken old grudges, pulled into sunlight. Healers trained side by side, learning how to save hearts and bodies. Nora kept no office, no throne. She worked among them, her hands always dirty, her laugh always quiet, her eyes always patient. She refused to lead, but others followed anyway. She would glance behind her at times, puzzled. Luro would answer only with a smile and a shake of his great head. "You're not leading," he would say. "You're returning, they've just been waiting for someone to walk first." And she did, one breath at a time. Years passed not in silence, but in music. Ether Spire became more than a memory. It was rebuilt not with politics, but with purpose. It housed no council, only circles of dialogue. There were no banners, only carvings etched into stone and steel, showing wolves and humans seated together beside fire. Nora never left. She walked the halls every morning, taught triage in the afternoons, tended the sick in the evenings. Her touch never grew weaker. If anything, her hands became steadier, as if the galaxy had given her something in return for what she'd awakened on her 55th standard birthday. The stars over Vex dimmed slightly. No one panicked. It was not an eclipse, not a malfunction. It was something ancient, something soft. The first pack, those who had slept since the world was wild, gathered one final time above.